No, just got to know when to start.
Okay, you got about 1 minute.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Sunday School. We have a few attendees here this morning, scattered out in various places. Mostly our regulars. It's good to see you. I hope you've had a good week. We're still studying through Proverbs, which I call Smart Living through Proverbs. In our lesson book today, I'm going to take a left turn from what he's doing. And when I began to prepare, there's something that our authors mentioned in the first page that caught my attention that I decided to run with. So, but we're on August the 2nd. I put a couple of cartoons relevant to that in the newsletter this week. If I email that to you, or if you want me to email you, let me know. Send that out. I'll post it on our church website and also on my Facebook page. But I've got a couple of cartoons in the newsletter every month, every week. And this one was about, oh my gosh, is it August already? August the 2nd. How could that be?
Yeah, what happened?
Yeah. Well, the kiddos will be going back to school in odd and unusual ways. But on August the 2nd here, it says staying sober. So that's an interesting topic. And as I said, I've heard Joanne mention several times that every time you pick up the Bible, you can be reading the same area, the same passage. It can speak to you in a different way. And I'm not going to be speaking about sobriety, but if I was intrigued of all these years of reading through Proverbs and studying, even preaching in it and from it, I think that Proverbs 22:20 had kind of passed me by. I had not noticed it, or I'd not taken great notice of it. Well, that's where Solomon says, I have 30 sayings. So I said, well, that sounds like modern parlance. So we like lists a lot in modern time. I really like lists. They help me get things done or see where I'm at or kind of get a beat on things. He says, I got 30 things I want to tell you. So we're going to be looking at the 30 sayings of Solomon that he mentions here. And I found some guidance. I didn't trust my own ability to rightly divide, so I've looked around, and this is a very common way of looking at this section. Evidently, Solomon's 30 sayings are, said, Solomon's 30 sayings, and I said, I'd never heard of that. So I'd read the sayings, and I'd read this part of Proverbs, but this one verse where he says, okay, here's a list, and then we're going to try to hit about 15 of them today. I've been treading through this and hitting it a few times, and I always feel like I'm on thin ice when I do it, or I'm on dangerous waters. But sometimes Solomon will just say something, and I'll just sit back and I'll say, is that true? Is that always? And let me say this again this way. Solomon was given great wisdom by God. But we know from reading the story of Solomon that Solomon made lots of mistakes. I guess you could say 700 wives is a mistake, or maybe it's 700 mistakes. I'm sure if you got to talk to those 700 women and say, hello, Mrs. Solomon, which number, I don't know if she wore a number or what, this is number 408. Do you feel like this was a big mistake? And they say, yeah, it's really not much fun. Me and the girls hang out, but we don't get to see the mister very much. I don't know. I think that, and we see, especially in the book of Ecclesiastes, which is also written by Solomon, and some things in the Song of Solomon we're going to see where he never says, "Thus saith the Lord." He never claims to be a prophet. He never claims to say, "Let me tell you a word from God." He never says that. He says, "Let me tell you what I think." Yes, this is the Word of God. But when Paul talks about rightly dividing the word of truth, there are many, many things. There are times when people say things or record things in the Bible. There are even a number of times, maybe a half dozen times, where Paul says, "Now this is not the Lord, this is me talking." And so I've heard great seminary classroom debates. They say, well, regardless of whether it was the Lord talking or Paul, it's the Word of God. It's in the Scriptures, and so it's binding, or it's authoritative. I thought, well, then that means it's pointless or senseless for Paul to say, "Now I'm putting away my God pen here for just a minute. I'm going to tell you something that this is just from me." I do that in the pulpit a lot. I'll say, "Now look, this is what the Bible says, and I'm not contradicting the Bible, but let me tell you what I think and what this means to me. But I'm very fallible." So Solomon, I believe, is a man whom God blessed, obviously blessed with great wisdom. He was a very wise man. He was known as the wisest man of his time. Maybe he was the wisest man who ever lived in many regards.
Well, you had people from all the nations of the known earth that would travel to see Solomon, and that wasn't easy in those days.
That's right. We're going to see today kind of a hint at the kind of things he dealt with as king. He had to make decisions, and often he made judgments where he's very famous for the split the baby decision. Remember that? You know that story, don't you? Split the baby. That's what he's most famous for, I guess, or in my mind. A very wise thing that he did. It just happened to turn out okay. But he is saying this is the very best wisdom coming from a human being. And he never makes any bones about it. I guess we'd say it that way. He says, "Let me tell you, son," he said, "I just want to give you some fatherly advice." But he never says, I would say that the very best advice that he ever gives, and he makes it over and over again, is the very best thing you could possibly do is fear the Lord, is trust the Lord, is lean upon the Lord, is look to the Lord for guidance. He never says, if it's between me and the Lord, follow me. He says, listen to what I have to say, but he says, what I want to do is just share with you some common sense. Well, I still don't feel that I handled that superbly, but I'll demonstrate as we go along. Saying number one is in chapter 22. I think a piece of it is in verse 2, and also in verses 22 and 23 of that chapter. Verse 2 says, the rich and the poor, and saying one is poverty perception. Poverty, he said, this is the way to perceive poverty. This is the way to look at poverty. The rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord made them both. That's funny. I don't care who you are. Sometimes we think that the poor are poor because they've made poor decisions or they were born poor. I guess we could point to a lot of different reasons why someone would be in poverty. But even Jesus implied that it is that he says you're going to have the poor always. It's a part. It's almost like a strata, a realm, a society, an area of it's a grouping of people. It's simply because of the nature of our fallen world. If we live in a fallen world, then we're always going to have people who lack, who are destitute, who are in need, who want. And so that's just the very nature of things. And in a sense here, he says the Lord made them both. He created them. Is it saying he made the poor poor? He made the rich rich? Well, a part of whatever your lot in life is, wherever I'm at, or whatever my station is, then we need to see that God is not just an observer, that he's back. He's involved. And so he's not surprised by my poverty or my wealth. He is not hindered from changing one to the other. But look at verse 22 and 23. It says, don't rob a poor man because he's poor. So that's what happens in society today. It seems that the taxes are higher on the poor than they are on the upper class, the rich. It seems that poor people cannot defend themselves and so often find themselves targets of malignancy. Don't crush the oppressed at the gate. You see, the gate was the place where people came and went. That's where decisions were made. That's where the courts were conducted. That's where business was conducted. The gates for them in that day was like our courthouse. For the Lord will take up their case and will plunder those who plunder them. God knows that since we're living in a fallen world, that's not the way He planned for things to be. A sinful world, a world that rejects Him. That was not God's desire or God's design. But He says, since it is that way, I'm not going to let the very lowliest of people be mistreated or abused. He said, I need you to see that. That's the perception of poverty that the Proverbs writer says. And then he talks about an anger danger. Chapter 22, verses 24 and 25. The anger danger is saying number 2. Don't make friends with an angry man, and don't be a companion with a hot-tempered man. I think it's difficult for us to choose our friends. We seem to find ourselves with friends. Looking back on my childhood, I don't know if it's because of location or a lack of wisdom on my part, but I had some very poor friends. I think sometimes I was a poor friend. I think I wasn't the best friend that I could possibly be. I've been very fortunate in my later years to be able to reconnect with childhood friends. I seek them out. Sometimes they have found me. And I find that I'm happy to sometimes to tell them, I wish I'd been a better friend to you. I wish I'd known you better. I hear of a passing of an old childhood friend. Recently I've had several. And I say, I wish I'd known them better. I didn't know how to know people when I was a child. I didn't know how to behave. I didn't know how to talk to people. I was frightened to death of girls. I didn't know how to have relationships. I was backward and shy. I was so envious of people, young boys and girls that I knew who seemed to be so at ease with all their other friends. And I was so clumsy at making friendships. And I'm a little better at it now. So when I meet them, I can talk to them and we can actually reflect and remember. So here, he says you need to make a choice. Don't people who are always angry people, hot-tempered people, or you will learn his ways and you entangle yourself in a snare. Though I sensed great passion and depth of conviction, I never sensed or felt that Martin Luther King Jr. was angry. With all of the things that he dealt with during the civil rights movement, and I remember that. I was paying attention. Our little school, black people came in, black children became part of our class. It's an amazing memory for me. I became very good friends with Henry Humphrey. He was the first black child in the 6th grade there at Flint Elementary. He played on our baseball team. Having Henry in our class was trying. It must have been very, very, very difficult for him. And I'm glad that I reached out to him. He is a friend that I chose. I chose to be his friend. And he was seemed to be fond of me as well. I took him home to meet my parents. Not the best decision I've ever made. But my mother drew me aside when I brought Henry home after school to tell me this might not be a good situation. So I was very innocent. I saw no harm in it. And though even my mother's gentle persuasion and her warning was probably best. And she did not offend my guest. She did not say anything so that he could hear. But we did move on. We went elsewhere. It was an awkward situation. Things changed in our family, in our life later on. So I'm glad that I chose him as a friend. But it was difficult. It was difficult. Saying number 3, he says, put up a borrowing barrier. Chapter 22, verses 26 to 27. Don't be one of those who enter agreements who put up security for loans. I guess all of us have a mortgage and things like that. We could all say, I wish I could live my life. And I'm amazed and fascinated. You can turn on the radio and hear there are radio programs and books that have been written and documentaries about how to live your life debt-free. People can do it. It can be done. I guess Terry and I have a better grip or grasp on our finances. She takes care of our finances, and she balances our checkbook and plans our finances. She does a very good job at it. She is excellent. And Danny and Liz both have a good head on their shoulder, but I don't even know if the banker in the family kind of runs the bank or not. But I think a goal in life or wisdom in life would be, let's see if we can be free of debt. If you have no money to pay, even your bed will be taken from under you. Well, he said, you can lose everything. Now, this is spoken by the richest man in the world, so he's giving some good advice. Sacred survey. Now, these are 30 sayings, but we're going to see there's really only 29 because, in a way, he kind of gives this one twice, and I'll show you. He says, don't move any ancient boundary marker that your fathers set up. What he's talking about is the most important thing to them was their land, their property. Not because it was land or property, but where did they get it from? This was the promised land. This is what God had brought them to. The whole story of the history of Israel was coming to this place, and God mark it off. And when they marked it off, they would make big stone Ebenezer's everywhere, and they would put up pillars, boundary markers, land. Can you imagine that you might go out and be surveying your land and say, hey, I think this pile of stones was over there a little farther back last time. It looks like our property's getting smaller. Can you imagine somebody doing that? I believe if you do a study of rural America, there have probably been more legal disputes about property lines than you and I could even possibly imagine. Deeds have been drawn out, court cases have been fought, neighbors have come to almost murderous blows over questioning who built on whose property. Well, he says those are sacred. They were put up by your fathers. Don't be moving those things. There are some things that you ought to leave alone. There's a fast food restaurant, and they've come up with these new bowls full of food. Kentucky Fried Chicken did this several years ago. It just looked like, I'm sorry, slop in a bowl. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Put your beans and your potatoes and your gravy and just everything you're going to eat, pieces of chicken on top in a bowl. And I just thought, well, it's all just food, and I probably was going to order all that anyway, but I don't like my food touching. It's just, I want my peas over here and my cornbread. I want things kind of... What I liked, I spent most of my time in school. I guess you could tell somebody's been in a certain school or they've been in prison. I liked those things that they put your food in at school, and they had little pockets. Put that food here, and this food here, and that food there. And so, I'm not even going to mention this new commercial. But every time they start playing their commercial song, I just come alive. You know why? because they're playing the theme song to Welcome Back, Kotter.
Yeah.
Welcome back. And you know, for slot bowls. And I'm thinking, some things you ought to just leave alone. Leave it alone. I don't want to think of Vinnie Barbarino and Epstein. You know, Epstein he wasn't in school yesterday, so he would bring an excuse. He would say, Epstein's mother at the bottom, signed by Epstein's mother. So I was like, it's hilarious, you know. And he always, at the end of the show, he always told a joke. He would like sitting on his, Gabe Kaplan, he was sitting on his couch. So I don't want to be thinking of slot bowls while I'm thinking, welcome back, Kotter. Just leave those boundaries set up. Here's number 5, hard work helps. Do you see a man skilled at his work? He will stand in the presence of kings. You know why? Because the king needs his stuff fixed every once in a while. He needs somebody to come in and fix this throne. This arm is not working. I think Danny had to go fix Randy's throne. It wasn't ejecting him this week. Not that throne, the throne in his living room. And it was where he helps him get up and sit down. And needed some switch problem. He will not stand in the presence of unknown men. So he says, hard work. He says, you know, that's if you become well known for that, if you become popular, that's a guy's a hard worker. Number 6, bribe tribe. When you sit down to dine with a ruler, consider carefully what is before you. So look around, see what's on the menu. See, why, you know, you're sitting with a ruler. Everything has a purpose. You put a knife to your throat if you have a big appetite. Now, you know who knows this better than anybody? Teenage girls that you take out on a date. You take teenage girls out on a date. And they said, oh no, I just have just some of this. That's all I want. That's all I have, some of yours. And that's what he's talking. Put a knife to your throat if you have a big appetite. You know, she's trying to make an impression. So if you take a girl out on a date and she starts going, and just eating with both hands, you know, that's going to make an impression too. Now, she probably eats normally, or maybe super normally. But she has a strategy. She understands that I'm not going to make a good impression with this young man whom I'm trying to flirt if I eat like a hog. So here he says, when you go out to eat with somebody, hold back. Never mind. I was fixing to give you an example. I'm just going to shut up.
Well, like you said, hold back.
Well, this is about one of Carissa's boyfriends in the past, so I'm just going to say, don't desire his choice food, for that food is deceptive. And so, you know, just eat what's put before you. Don't ask for something. So he says, he's trying to bribe you. You need to understand that. The reason he invited you over to his house for this splendid meal is that he's got a point. So always being on your toes. Good advice. Saying number 7, riches to rags. We don't usually hear it that way. Don't wear yourself out to get rich. Stop giving your attention to it. As soon as your eyes fly to it, it disappears. For it makes wings for itself. That is wonderful imagery. And flies like an eagle to the sky. Ooh, what's that? Oh, that's your prosperity. That's wealth and riches. There it goes. It's flying away. He says, it's kind of like trying to find the gold at the end of the rainbow, you know? You just keep going. Just keep going. And you're not going to find it. He says, don't wear yourself out looking for that. And he says, here's the chameleon complex. This is saying number 8 from Proverbs 23, verses 6 through 8. Don't eat a stingy person's bread. Don't eat a stingy person's bread, and don't desire his choice food. For it's like someone calculating inwardly. In other words, he's figuring out what? How much you owe him. He ate my bread. He's sitting at my table. He owes me. He owes me. He owes me. You can tell when you're in the company of someone who's keeping track with how much you owe them. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. Here, eat and drink, have some of this. And he's tabulating, he's calculating, he's keeping a list. You will vomit the little you've eaten and waste your pleasant words. Well, I think sometimes my speech is a little bit vulgar or base. And he said, well, you know, anytime you bring vomit into a conversation, it's pretty much gone south. He says, no. He says, you're just, it doesn't matter how much you seem to enjoy the situation. He says, it's going to sour on your stomach later on. Wisdom wasted. This is saying number 9. Don't even speak to a fool, for he will despise the inside of your words. Have you ever been talking with someone or debating with someone or having a conversation and you're talking with each other and all of a sudden you just go, and then all of a sudden you think, this is pointless. This is useless.
It's like I'm pitching, but he doesn't get it.
Yeah, that's right. I'm throwing the ball and he's not swinging at it. I'm thinking, I've done that. I've just opened my mouth like I'm fixing to say my next point. I'm thinking like, and there's this little voice in the back of my mind saying, what is the point? What are you getting done? Are you advancing your cause? Are you convincing him? You know, there's just a lot of people. I used to think that I could talk people into things or persuade people. And I look and say, you know, I'm just, no, this is a waste of time. He says, I'm wasting wisdom.
Well, if you look at it another way, that would keep you from getting into a whole lot of arguments.
Yeah. And just learn to, he's saying, size things up. He says, when you open your mouth, he says, you know what? One of us in this conversation is a fool, and I think I know who it is. Well, you don't have to call that person a fool and walk off. But he said, you know, there's no need in taking it any further. Good advice. Now, here's number 10 is about lawful landmarks. Now, I think the split the baby thing is very dramatic, and it's mind-blowing, and it's impressive. But I guarantee you that every day as Solomon sat on his throne, he had people coming in that had to do with, he moved my landmark. He's building something on my property. My daddy set this, because here, saying number 10, he says, don't move an ancient boundary marker. I kind of want to say, Solomon, you're getting old because this was number 2. You've already hit this one. And I think he might say, you know, I see so many cases like this that it's just on my mind. I think that a lot of people came in to ask the king to decide for them. We see it often in Solomon's life. It was Moses' father-in-law came up to him, and that's what Moses was doing with his whole day, helping people settle disputes. I guess I had an uncle, he would say, that's ignorant. I think I know how to spell ignorant, but he said, that's ignorant. You know, that we need courts and a whole judicial system for helping people decide things. Don't move an ancient boundary marker. Don't encroach on the fields of the fatherless. For their Redeemer is strong, and he will take up their case against you. So a little extra, but basically the same. Receive reproof. Saying number 11. Apply yourself to discipline and listen to words of knowledge. Discipline is a structured process for working on your flaws. Me working on my flaws. Discipline is when someone sometimes disciplines me. They help me with discipline. A coach or a teacher, a parent might discipline me or have a discipline for me. We seem to think we attribute or equalize punishment with discipline. It's not that case, not the way. You see, disciples are those, it has to do with learning. That's what the word disciple means. And that's what the word discipline means. It's a process of learning. Listen to words of knowledge. He says, pay attention. There's wisdom out there. You can hear it. You can know it. Number 12, distribute discipline. In other words, you're a disciplined person. Learn how to discipline others. Don't withhold discipline from a youth. If you beat him with a rod, he will not die. Well, you could, you know. Here's another one of those things that there have been, and I may sound, pardon me for a laugh, but there have been people who have actually taken the life of their children, who have beaten them to death. And so, yes, you beat someone with punishment that does not scar, that does heal, that does have value.
Like your mom and dad giving you a spanking when you were a little kid.
Exactly. And so there is some value to that. Strike him with a rod, and you will rescue his soul from Sheol. I was a pretty compliant child when I was young. I kept the rules. I was obedient. And it was not because I was a sweet, innocent, pure, good person. I always had a great respect for my mother and father. And I wasn't worried about hurting their feelings. I wasn't worried about disappointing my mom or dad. I never thought, oh, that's going to really make Dad feel bad. I always thought, I'm going to have my liberties restricted. I'm going to have to go to my room. We didn't call it time out, but I'm not going to be able to go to the fair. I'm going to have my allowance restricted. Various times, my mom and dad, they gave us an allowance. We'd never heard of anything like that. And also, they helped us open up a savings account at the bank. They were doing things like that. They were helping us. But for the most part, many times I would be out with my friends, and there were things that I would forbid myself to partake in, simply because if my mother and father ever found out about it, then there would be pain of some kind. That's not a bad thing. I didn't fear my parents, but I had great respect for them, and they were not abusive. There were very few times in my life when they actually punished me with corporal punishment, with a switch or a belt and so forth. Not very much at all, because I didn't enjoy those things. I avoided those things by being compliant. Number 13, common sense counts. Chapter 23, verses 15 and 16. My son, if your heart is wise, my heart indeed will rejoice. If my children make wise decisions, then it makes me happy. That's what he's saying. If your heart is wise, it makes me happy. My innermost being will cheer when your lips say what is right. He's talking like a parent here, and I agree with him. Number 14, envy error. He says, here's the envy error. Don't let your heart envy sinners. Instead, always fear the Lord, for then you will have a future and your hope will never fade. Sometimes the schemes of sinners bring them into wealth, or sometimes it appears to make things go their way, and it makes us envious. I wish that I had that. I wish I was in their position. I wish that I had the same things that they do. And he says, don't envy sinners. He says they're going to lose everything that they have. He says, but your hope will never fade. Number 15, we're going to cover half of them, and next Sunday we'll lose a step with it, especially with the quarterly. But it says, slothful sinners. Listen, my son, and be wise. Keep your mind on the right course. Don't associate with those who drink too much wine, or with those who gorge themselves on meat. For the drunkard and the glutton will become poor, and grogginess will clothe them in rags. We live in a society today where we overindulge ourselves. We eat too much, we drink too much, we enjoy too many pleasures. It has been the downfall of many a kingdom in the history of humanity. Many empires have fallen because people have become weak and soft, and they've become there's an animated movie called Wall-E, and it's kind of a futuristic story. It is this dystopian kind of idea that the planet Earth is one day going to become so terrible, the environment is going to be so bad, the climate's going to be so bad that humans will have to leave. Well, a great generational ship lifted off from Earth and went out into the future, and so we get to see many, many, many years later this population of people that are floating out in space on this wonderful, technologically miraculous spaceship, as they're looking for a green planet. They're looking for a planet with that life that will support them. But in the meantime, in this movie, they have all become so fat and so weak and so incapable that every one of them have to ride around on little scooters. Now, I'll be honest with you, every time I go to Walmart, I'm looking at one of those scooters and say, I really thing. Okay, that's later for me. And when I see people writing them, I don't look down upon them, and I say that's what they should do. That's what those are for. And one day, I'll take advantage of that. So I'm kind of, but there are still many times when even now, I remember 2 years ago in October, my family took me to Disneyland. If I ever go back to Disneyland, I'm going to ride everywhere I go. I'm not going to walk a step. But in Wall-E, they got to where they couldn't even stand up on their own 2 feet. I think that's a possibility if we're living in a day and an age where we have so many blessings and there's so much plenty that sometimes we overdo it. And here he is saying, be aware of this, listen to this, be cognizant of this. It's very, very possible that he's saying don't associate with those kinds of people. He said you could become one of those kinds of people. I know that it's not, and what I was talking about is not so much about gluttony or wine bibbing, but it's about my age. As I'm getting older, I'm realizing Danny was talking about his decision. There are certain kind of work that he can't do, and it's more and more I'm beginning to say, I can't do that anymore. Can't do that anymore. Not because I'm lazy. It's just that I can't breathe anymore. I can't hold my head up. I can't take those steps. Well, there are 15 more. Those are all excellent, and we're going to hit the other 15, and it may put us a little bit behind. But we're moving ahead. And 30 sayings of Solomon, and we've hit half of them. And again, very good advice, and it's just generalities, and speaking and with the best of intent, saying, listen to this, pay attention, because this is good to know from someone who got his wisdom from God. All right? Thank y'all for coming here today. Thank you, those of you who have tuned in today and are viewing from home. Thank you for being a part of our course, Smart Living from Proverbs.
When Solomon said that,